Welcome to the Soul of Enterprise, Business in the Transformation Economy, sponsored by Woodard. Building your ideal practice with coaching, education, community, and resources. I'm Ed Kless with my friend and co-host Ron Baker, and folks, on today's show, a very special treat. Once again, we have Joe Woodard. We're calling the show In the Octagon, our 8th interview with Joe Woodard. Welcome back to the show, Joe.
It's always good to be here. It's always good to be here with both of you.
Ron, 8 times with Joe. I mean,
I know.
He got the gold jacket at 5 times. Like, I don't know, like...
I don't, he's coming up.
Must have got lost in the mail. Yeah. I've never seen this gold jacket.
It's a metaphor, Joe.
It's a metaphor, yeah.
You get the metaphorical jacket. It's on. Yes.
In the metaphorical octagon. But as always, Joe, we're really pleased to have you. The last time we actually had members of your team on, which was fantastic as well. Highly encourage people to go back and listen to that episode. That was episode 527. So thesoulofenterprise.com/527. But Joe, it's also coming up on Scaling New Heights, which we always talk about. And I have to say that for whatever reason, and I have not gotten around to reading this book, but David Allen's Getting Things Done has come across my desk no less than 4 times in the last week.
Interesting.
One of them was you, one of them was with another consultant, and then just various times. So, now it's got to be bumped up to the top of my queue, obviously. But let's first talk about this. Why should I read this book? Tell me a little bit about this and how it relates to Scaling New Heights.
Yeah, well, so the theme this year is Make It So. So we could think of no one more appropriate to come in than David Allen, given the fact that this book is an amazing, some $10 million copies worldwide, however many hundreds of languages. It's the definitive book on maximizing productivity. And though it's been around for a while, right, he's still the definitive voice. It's sort of like having Covey come when he was in his 80s, right, to come talk about the 7 habits of highly effective people. And that's he's an octogenarian. That's where he's at in his life cycle. He's in his 80s. And he's going to be coming now with all that wisdom to bring as well. The reason you should read the book, I read it about 5 times over the last 15 years. And the reason that you should read the book is because, unlike any other book on productivity, most of which actually have words like time management in their name, right? And they actually are books on task management, and they say time management. He's focused on prioritization, and he's focused on prioritization largely through elimination, which is I like to say that the road, if you're going to begin with the end in mind, the end between the beginning and the end is a road paved with no's, N-O's. How many things do you have to say no to in order to forge out that amazing outcome of the thing you're trying to create? And so Michael Hyatt focuses a little bit on this too with his book, Free to Focus. So this is not a brand new concept. Others have carried the mantle on it. But the 4 Ds of David Allen's methodology are really easy to deploy in any situation. And that's the do it, delegate it, delete it, or refer it. Actually starts with delete it, do it, delegate it, defer it. And so I've used that methodology to maintain a 0 inbox lifestyle since having read the book. So I haven't in 15 years gone to sleep with a single email in my inbox, not in 15 years. So if that doesn't intrigue the audience enough to say, okay, if you read this book, you can actually maintain 0 inbox. And if people are wondering, how do you possibly accomplish that every day with consistency? What if you just cannot get to every email? Well, that's the defer it part, right? So I'm either going to delete the email, I'm going to do it, respond to the email, I'm going to delegate it, ask somebody else to respond to the email, or I'm going to defer it, but I will have done one of those 4 things with everything that hits my inbox. And emails is the most common example, but it's any input. He doesn't call them inboxes, he calls them inputs. Text, Instagram posts, direct messages on LinkedIn, emails, Slack, Microsoft Teams, your project management system. Inputs are coming at you like 5 different machines in a batting cage. And he breaks down those 4 Ds into what do you do when you defer it? So you have to categorize it, prioritize it, put it into horizons, revisit it. And my favorite quote, and then I'll just kind of take a breath because you wind me up and I'll go with David Allen. But my favorite quote from David Allen is, you should never have a thought twice unless you enjoy having that thought. Now, there's something Buddhist and Zen to that anyway, right? But you're fretting and worry and anxiety and fear and all those things that make us think that by cycling thoughts, we can change reality. But the context with, and I believe in all that too, by the way, clarity of mind, mind like water, he calls it in the book. But what he means specifically here is once it's captured and categorized and placed into a system that you trust and revisit regularly, you can finally clear your mind. And he said that when he used to coach executives, he would find that once they deployed the system, they would have this flood of creativity. He said some people would even get emotional and weep because finally their mind was clear. And so I deployed the methodologies, and I remember where I was. There are several times I remember where I was in life. You know, when Reagan got shot, I was in 8th grade, so that dates me. And I was sitting in class. I know where I was when Challenger exploded. I know where I was when I first had mental clarity from not carrying tasks around. And the last time I had it was before I was in high school. And it was very emotional and it was very liberating. And that's the power of this book.
Well, first quick side note is I'm horrified to learn that since I was a freshman in high school, I'm a year older than you. But okay.
But you know exactly where you were sitting in class that day.
I do. Yes, I do. I have third seat. I was in geometry class. But you know what's amazing about this concept is you're talking about it in terms of how you put it in practice with regard to your email. Well, this is also a way that people put this in place together at the highest level in their organization. You know, I think it's Steve Jobs said, I'm most proud of what Apple hasn't done.
Yes.
Right. So that's a massive no from a strategic level. And then in the intermediate, and I'm curious if this is a tool that you guys use at Woodard, because I am not the biggest fan of the SWOT analysis. I much prefer the start, stop, continue, specifically because of the stop. Mm-hmm. And that you must stop things in order to either start or continue the others. So right. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, so I'm not a fan of SWOT as it exists by itself. I create a combination of the SOAR and the SWOT, the strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. And then I take the W and the T and I put them in the middle. So once I've defined my strengths, my opportunities, what are the weaknesses and threats I must address in order to create my results and my aspirations and results? So that was not part of the context of your thing, but it's how I redeem SWOT, because SWOT by itself is not enough. But to your point, part of the weaknesses and the threats is what you have to say no to. It's the capacity weakness, because weaknesses are internal to your organization. So you have a capacity weakness that's inherent in every time you have an aspiration. And you can mitigate that weakness, address that weakness through elimination. Yes. Or deferral.
Yeah. Right.
And it's so interesting you mentioned Steve Jobs. I just finished reading a book. The title seems a little bit janky, but the substance is really good. It's disruption. Right. Seems a little bit redundant, but the book is remarkably good. And they make sense of the title. Anyway, in the book, it talks about how Steve Jobs had the iPad, ready to go, ready to deploy, and deferred it until after the iPhone launched. So in order to accomplish what Apple needed to accomplish, they had to say no to the iPad for years. And some of us don't have the strength to do that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they've been saying no to a good version of Siri for years, and we're going to get that sometime soon. But just getting back to the email for a second, I just want to tell the story because I think it's funny. I actually had a boss who I think both of us know at Sage, and he would get so behind in his email that he would declare email amnesty.
Yes.
he said,
David Allen actually addresses that in the book.
he said, I would just delete all of my email, and then he deleted it all. And he would send out to the team, he would say, I just want to let you know, if you've been waiting on a decision from me, I've deleted all of my email. So you now need to resend me whatever it is I need to address.
And then you have to do it to all of your clients. You have to do it to all of your vendors. Yeah, you're right. It's an amnesty thing. And it's so funny that David Allen actually mentions that is the cycle for a lot of executives. About once every year or 18 months, they send that out. So,
and I think this guy was more on a 4 or 5 month basis, but that's one of the dangers of being in the middle management in a large organization. So yeah, but I think that's great, and I think I actually get like the shakes when I see somebody open up their iPhone and next to it there's like 10,000 unread emails.
Yes. I don't know how they sleep at night.
It makes me start to scratch. I'm just like, I'm not like you. I don't have 0 inbox every night, but I do have less than 10. Usually that's my. And most of those are to be addressed the next morning. The next morning, exactly. But I will say, for those of you who haven't, and I actually talked through this with my wife recently, she was not aware of the feature in Outlook where you can schedule it to come back to you. The the snooze feature. Yes. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic to just put it in and say, hey,
that is a form of short-term deferral.
Exactly.
I would not say David Allen would not say it's categorized and prioritized. So be careful, but. Short-term deferral, like 24 hours, few hours. Yes, it's
okay. All right. Well, we're coming up on our break, but the last thing I want you to know, Joe, is I'm going to be sending you an email at a half hour later each day, so I know what time you go to bed.
Just to mess with me, right?
So, but we are up against our break. Want to remind our listeners they can get a hold of Ron or me by sending an email to asktsoe@verisage.com. Actually, asktsoe@thresholdnow.com is the proper email address. We've switched it over. Want to remind our listeners that check out our website at The Soul of Enterprise, where you can see show notes as well as previews to upcoming shows. We also have our Patreon channel available at patreon.com/TSOE. We do our bonus shows there as well. But right now, a word from our sponsors.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We're in the Octagon again with Joe Woodard for the 8th time. And Joe, it makes me nervous anytime you referred to David Allen's book as a classic business book, and that means it's either timeless wisdom or irrelevant.
We'll go with timeless wisdom. Yeah.
Okay, good. Let me jump to another book, Daniel Susskind, A World Without Work. I think I mentioned this, even at scaling, or maybe Ed did, I can't remember, but I've talked about it a lot before. In Hebrew, the word work and worship are the same. In other words, work is sacred, and it's how we serve God's other children or each other, however you want to think about it. But the world without work, I found completely unpersuasive.
Interesting.
It's warmed over. We've heard this story before. Lyndon Johnson formed a commission to study this issue. People have been predicting that work's going away. I don't buy it. I find it completely just nonsensical. And I'm a fan of Daniel Susskind, but not on this one. So I'm curious what you found.
Because I had just the opposite reaction. I found it incredibly convincing and then therefore sufficiently scary. So I'd love to kind of go back and forth with you on how we had that kind of a different takeaway from it. But first, kind of speaking to that work as worship, I think that's really where I want to kind of ultimately go is and he alluded to some of this that if there is a world without work because of the rise of the machines, of course, we're talking about the author of The Future of the Professions, where he was talking about AI displacement of the professions before it was cool. And when AI was largely, theoretical in its way it's manifesting today. Well, so now he's actually projecting in the book, spoiler alert, that there will be a world largely without work. And by the way, so does Michio Kaku in his works. They both say that this is going to happen. Gene Roddenberry predicted it in the 1960s, as we know, that the world of Star Trek is a world without commercialism and without the need to work in order to sustain your life. So it's a world of scientific exploration and artistry. And that's what compels people forward. So it's awfully idealistic, right? Work as worship is ultimately, I think, where a world without work is going to go. Therefore, I think it will be a world with work, but work where is defined in the service of humanity or in the service of God in that case. And in that sense, I think, I like to take the Gene Roddenberry optimistic view that after a period of adjustment, possibly with even a reduction in the numbers of humanity, you're going to end up with a period of chaos and correction that will result in something that feels better than what we have today. Okay. And it's about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where shelter, food, all of that's automatically taken care of. And then you can sort of follow the hierarchy up that will become better versions of ourselves, which is maybe kind of where Gene Roddenberry kind of based his thinking. But to kind of break down the book, and then Ron, you and I go back on how convincing we felt it to be. He does talk about sort of this rise of the machines and how we underestimate the machines. And I think at this point, fewer people are underestimating the machines, especially when you see things like Boston Dynamics is doing with robotics. Michio Kaku said that the knowledge economy is the first one to be disrupted because that is the realm of artificial intelligence. It has that mind, if you will. And then the brain of quantum computing will come in, and that's sort of the perfect storm for the professional. But then Michio Kaku would say the jobs that will stay around the longest are the ones that require the blue collar jobs that require physicality to them, repairing your HVAC machine or mowing your lawn or whatever. And then I see what's happening with robotics, and I see companies like Tesla who are prepared as others probably innovate ahead of them to offer robotics at scale. And I'm thinking, well, okay, well, my air conditioning can be fixed by a robot that shows up. That's not an unforeseeable future in 20 years. So Daniel Susskind is arguing, don't underestimate the machines in both their mind or in their function. And then the other thing he said, this was where we can really have a conversation. He's not a big believer in what's called the containment view. The containment view says that new jobs will emerge to replace those lost to automation. Now, that has been the case for the last 50 years. I think that you all are fond of saying, and it's come up on this show before, we've talked about it, that there was something like 55% agrarian economy in the 1950s, and it's what, 3 or 4% now.
Less.
Yeah, less. And that's a good example of, yes, but look at all the jobs that emerged that we could not have foreseen in the 1950s. Well, he hits that dead on and says that the reality of artificial intelligence as it intersects quantum computing is going to make the next 50 incomparable to the last 50. It's not even that we're going to accelerate faster, which he argues we're going to do. We're going to accelerate differently. That any job that we could possibly not foresee is predicted to be managed by AI, foreseeable or not. And so he goes with the replacement view. Technological advancements will lead to a permanent decline in the number of quality jobs. And I don't know, he sold me, Ron. Why didn't he sell you?
Because I don't buy it. We don't sit around and miss the days of, bowling pin setters or telephone operators. I mean, I love Daniel Susskind, but he can't foresee the future. Creativity and innovation always take us by surprise. Otherwise,
life always finds a way, right? That Jurassic
absolutely,
Park.
absolutely. And Daniel Susskind has no more idea what the future brings than you or I do. What I do know is, going all the way back through human history, humans have always created, strived. We're not born for comfort. This is what bugs me about the burnout theory. We're not born for comfort. We're born for challenge.
And you think if we take out Maslow's bottom layer, we suffer?
If General Motors could produce 1 million cars a year with one employee, they would. I don't think you measure an economy by the number of jobs it creates. Jobs not the purpose. Human flourishing is the purpose. And to the extent that Toyota and GM and all the others could make their cars with 2 employees, then we'd all be richer to go do something else. And I do think what does tie into this, not so much Suskind's work, but Joe Pine's work, I think moving to the transformation economy is where we're going to head next. It's not going to be about goods and services. I will concede the goods and services to the robot. Bless them, they can have it. I want the transformations, because that's higher up on the value curve, and I think that's where we're heading. And I don't think an AI.
Are you back to the arts and the exploration? Because that was Gene Roddenberry's thing, is art and exploration.
Well, I think it's beyond that. I think transformations are deeply personal. The customer's the product, right? And I think we're always going to be able to provide those as human beings. There's so much work to do out there. I just don't see robots doing all of it. I can't imagine a robot coming and fixing my washing machine. Maybe it could climb the stairs.
I can absolutely imagine that. Truck pulls up, robot gets off, fixes the washing machine. I can definitely imagine that. Now we're talking 20, 30 years.
Sure. And if that happens, great. And if it can cut my hair, great. We're going to let it perform surgery? Maybe.
Well, actually, I saw an amazing article on that in Popular Science today. Yeah, they're predicting, again, about that 20-year horizon. And nobody can see the future, but they're predicting that the machines will do surgery more accurately than a doctor. Yes.
Yeah, I believe that. I think that's very possible, but I just don't. Then the surgeon's going to go do something else. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And, you read these discovered drugs that, we're on the threshold of this one cancer drug I just read about. I can't remember the name, but I mean, there's a lot going on that I know AI is going to accelerate and contribute to, but we're still going to need humans to come up with creative ideas. AI doesn't have a soul.
No, it does not have a soul. So you and I would agree completely that the role of souls interacting with souls in meaningful ways that should always be the defining quality of humanity. The question that is, if we don't have work, what will be the way that we relate to each other? We remove the commercial construct. What is left? The spiritual, the artistic, the humanitarian,
but Joe, I don't see any evidence that work has been eliminated in any sector, that has been of consequence lately. I'm not talking about agriculture. I'm just talking about, show me where jobs have been just flat out eliminated.
Mm.
recently. I'm talking like the last 10 years
I don't know. Ernst and
because
Young
of
announced
AI.
in back-to-back press releases that they were laying off tens of thousands of people and that they had just brought on agentic AI. I mean, back-to-back press releases. So I don't know.
But
Coincidence?
we create millions of jobs a month, and we destroy millions of jobs a month. That net number you always see reported, right? That we
Right.
created 240,000 jobs this month. That's a net number. It's
Yeah.
actually 10 million jobs were destroyed and 10.2 million jobs were created. I mean, there's churn in the
We ever
economy
just
all
start
the time.
destroying ahead of the ability to create. And that's the argument of the book. And I agree with you completely. Daniel Susskind cannot see the future. No one can. But and it's conceivable when you start talking about when you combine Michio Kaku's quantum computing book with every book you've ever read on artificial intelligence. And I just finished a eye-opening Brown University class about this too, and what's happening in the corporate world.
Hmm.
And this whole agentic thing where agents work with agents, AI agents work with AI agents, and hundreds of them can all be doing independent tasks, collaborating together now. And then you add Boston Dynamics machines. I'm just saying it doesn't feel like it's hundreds of years off. That's all I'm saying.
Right. And look, I don't just I heard your show on the Brown course that you took with Heather, and that was great. But we're just going to find other things to do, I think. I have no doubt.
And I
I
couldn't
just
agree
don't.
with you more, Ron. I just think those things are not going to be defined as work as we see it today. I think it's going to be work as you defined it at the beginning of the conversation. That it's some form of worship, however you would define that as the elevation of the human experience or the delight or celebration of God. It, I'm right there with Gene Roddenberry. I think we're going to become better versions of humanity. But even he predicted a dark time before the light time. There was the eugenic wars and all these other things that were part of that Star Trek canon. So he, if he, in as much as he was able to see so many things in the future, flip phones and everything else he saw that no one could see, he did see a period of global war before as a reset. And I'm afraid that's going to be our next century, somewhere in there. It's going to be a massive reset period.
Hmm. Well, I remain optimistic. I mean, we're an amazingly adaptive species, and we will adapt to whatever, and we'll find ways to serve one another. I don't think we'll be sitting on a beach sipping Mai Tais.
Yeah, I don't think that either. I do think that the population is going to thin down a little bit to accommodate the less work, but I don't know how all that's going to flesh out.
That's already happening, right? With the lower birth
Mhm.
rates around the world, except for a few
Elon Musk is
countries.
concerned that it's happening, and I'm
But
like, stop and stop personally repopulating the planet while you're at it.
well, yes,
Yeah,
with serial children from different.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was like, stop because we need fewer people, in my opinion, as the bots take over more and more work.
Wow. See, now that's interesting. Ed and I are so pro-natal. We need more people. But okay, this is going to be an interesting
Well, you said
discussion.
growth for growth's sake is the philosophy of cancer cell. I'm quoting you. So,
Well,
we
yeah, but that's in a business context, not a human context.
well, if you think of each of us as viral agents, are we multiplying just to multiply, or I don't know, can we
I,
shrink?
the future belongs to those who show up.
Ed's having to bite his tongue. If
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
watching the video, he's
You've
like,
got Ed riled up. So this is great, Joe. But unfortunately, we're up against the break. And folks, I'd like to remind you, if you want to contact me or Ed, send us an email to asktsoe@thresholdnow.com. And Ed mentioned our Patreon channel, which you can subscribe to and get bonus content at patreon.com/TSOE. And now a word from our sponsors.
Joe, you're wrong. We are back on the Soul of Enterprise with Joe Woodard.
Ed's head would have exploded if he didn't get Joe, you're wrong. Out of his mouth. He was like,
and look, I'm going to try to calmly build the case, but here's the way I think about it. And I think we are potentially talking about the same thing. And this is what I'd call playing tennis on two different courts, right? We may not be defining our terms the same. And as a result, we're all thinking that we're always serving aces, but there's nobody else to hit the ball back to us on the other side, right? So, because when Ron and I talk about work, what 50, 100 years ago, the jobs that are around today, they wouldn't even have been imagined as work, right? Take something as mundane as a tax advisor. 100 years ago, if somebody said, well, in the future, there's going to be guys who and gals who sit around and try to think about ways to reduce your tax burden for not just the most wealthy, but hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of people, that you said, well, that's not work. Right? They wouldn't even that perception of that's not work at all, right? And I think that's really the interesting thing. And I know we have children that are getting older. I have one that's a son now at Texas A&M, a statistics major, hopefully data science, a master's degree to follow. I know that his job does not exist yet. Right? And I'm not even talking about a company. I'm talking about, and probably the company might not even exist, but the position that he will do, the tasks that he will have to complete, I don't think have even been imagined yet. But I think they will be. And this is what Ron's point was, why I think this is so important. We are incredibly creative at figuring out ways to serve one another, and why we think the whole work worship thing is so important is we think that it has been a detriment to society that people think of as work as a negative thing. When work needs to be considered, the way that you serve others, and I've said this to my kids, how is it that you make money? And notice the word make money, not get money, right? It's make money. In other words, it's an act of creation. And the answer to how do I find a job is you figure out a way to serve your fellow man, right? Whatever that way is. And I think, like I said, I think we're on the same page here. I just think that what I've come to realize is we cannot possibly even fathom what this idea of work is 10, 15, and certainly not even 50 years from now. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. It makes sense. And Daniel Susskind addresses that in the book.
Okay.
And he says that the past pattern of that is not a guarantee of the future. It does not necessarily indicate that the future will offer that same thing. And the reason he says the past does not determine the future in that situation is because the machines now can mimic human thought. And mimic is the key word. AI can't think, but it can mimic human thought. And I come back to the intersection of the brain it doesn't currently have, which is quantum computing, which is not just a faster chip. It's a fundamental shift in the way that the physics of the universe works as it intersects the ability of the processing power of a computer to work. Faster than the speed of light. It's the only thing that can move faster than the speed of light because it doesn't move at all. It exists in multiple states at the same time. And now you're going to take artificial intelligence and give it a brain that can exist in multiple states at the same time. Daniel Susskind is saying, I may not be able to conceive what the future work is, but I can conceive that it will still be done by these machines, no matter what is inconceivable.
See, and I think, honestly, and I'm going to throw out a term here, I think that's a very Marxist position.
Well, if you've ever read Susskind's books, there's a little bit of the state as our savior in it. So I wouldn't say that's completely juxtaposed to his view of life. As a matter of fact, he actually gets into the fact that nation states are going to have to rescue humanity, and he kind of takes a position that they're the only ones that will be able to. But it will be from that position of they're going to have to create the order, and they're going to have to create the definitions of the human interaction, which I think the three of us would disagree with. But whatever, actually, I think the key is even though I disagree with Suskind's landing spot that the nation states are going to end up creating the managed human experience of the future in a world without work, which is one of his landing spots. I think something is going to manage it. And I don't think that we will call it work, because I don't think we're going to reinvent the three of us. I get it, what you're saying, and I agree with it about work, worship, and the root words. But the whole human race isn't going to adopt the redefinition of that work. They're going to call it something else. Whatever they call it, it will be like what we're all describing here. Something that serves humanity in a way that we're not serving each other now, or not as liberated to serve each other now. And I get back to Roddenberry. It's going to be a renaissance of the arts. It's going to be a renaissance of exploration, a renaissance of psychological health, a renaissance of, I think, of spirituality. I think it's going to come with a massive spiritual awakening, that particular viewpoint, right? I think that we're going to see some better version of humanity, but I don't think that humanity will be doing what we currently call work. And I definitely don't believe we'll be trading that work for dollars.
Maybe this again I do agree that we're going to get wealthier, right? But wealth, the way that we understand it from George Gilder, is wealth is knowledge, right? And learning is growth. So whether or not we call it work, I'm just saying the perception of it is what's going to still be. I again go back to the tax advisor. That wouldn't have even been perceived as work. Just like you just said, I don't think we will call it work. They would have said that 100 years ago, right? The tax, that guy is not working.
We would have called that the service of your fellow human.
That's right. And I go to one of my favorite go-to stories, the Safe Return Doubtful story, when they were exploring the South Pole, right? And you talk about an age of exploration. Isn't going exploring work? Isn't becoming an explorer work?
In the broader definition of work, yes.
Right.
That's why I don't want to get stuck on world without work means world without work and all of its potential implications and definitions.
Yeah.
It means it quite literally that in the future, there will be a world where my work is not exchanged for the basic meeting of my needs. And that's the same thing Gene Roddenberry said. And I do think that is a future where the technology is going to supply for that bottom line of the Maslow's hierarchy, the shelter, the food. And it's going to be in such plenty that we won't have to exchange what we are calling this work/worship for that money. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a socialist. I'm also not a hyper-capitalist. I think capitalism is probably the least of the evils, and because we're sort of forced to exchange things to the good of each other, but we do it at an independent, autonomous level instead of at a government-dictated level, right? So this is just, my point is, it's the least of the two evils. I think having neither is better. And what drives capitalism is basic needs: shelter, food. Just if we can imagine for one moment a world where the machines are so powerful that no person on the planet ever has to have shelter or food, do we get better or are we to get worse? And that's when I come back to, we will get worse before we get better. Because the people that cannot handle a life without that exchange, that was the only reason they ever get out of bed or breathe or move. They don't understand worship. They're not in touch with a spiritual side or an artistic side. Their entire life has been about survival, and they don't know how to exist in any other state. I think that person will have irreparable psychological and sociological harm. And I don't know how they'll respond to that harm.
Maybe there'll be a job to help them get past that.
And maybe their full-time job is to receive
and perhaps
help. I don't know.
Right. And we could be and create a transformation path for them. Right. This is what we're talking about, is creating these transformations and transforming these people to where their brains are transformed to this. Look, I think again, I think we're very much on the same page about the what I call future glee. Right. I disagree that we have to go through a hard time, though. Like I disagree with that. Is it possible? Sure, it absolutely is. But I don't think it's even right now likely, nor is it without question going to happen. But I want to, and I think we've talked about this idea previously, but I just want to say, and this is another thing that's in alignment with what we're just talking about. Jim Pethokoukis, when we had him on in his book called The Conservative Futurist, which is a lousy title because there's nothing conservative about it, right? Just to have been called something futurist. But he gives a great example that I think is in alignment with what we're talking about. He says, for most of human history, there was 0.03 economic growth per year, 0.03. Then when we finally started the implementation of the agricultural revolution, the product revolution, it became 0.3. With the industrial revolution, products and services, it became 3%, and we saw that, right?
It's exponential growth. I see the charts. They're
right.
Yes.
But now, if we imagine that AI is going to help us get to within a relatively short period of time, let's call it 10 to 20 years, because I certainly see within 10 years there being $1 billion company that's 3 people.
Yes.
Right.
Well, I also foresee a future which, in today's economics, everybody's a millionaire. So
yeah, well, we can do that to just move the decimal place. This is my solution to that.
I'm just saying, there's so much supply of basic needs that yes, everybody.
Well, so the last point is he said, right, so AI gets us to 30% per year economic growth, which is a doubling of the standard of living every 3 years. Right now. What's so incredible about that is if you just take that chart, all of them are orders of magnitude increases, 0.03, 0.3, 3%, 30%, yet work didn't go away.
Right. But what happens at 300%, 3,000%, 30,000%? I mean, what happens whenever what happens when, and I'm sorry to be so negative, but when the oligarchy and the political power that is no longer can control and maintain their power by depriving others or by incrementally supplying others and protecting others. Whenever you have so much food, so much shelter, so much supply, so much wealth that everybody gets it and the powers can't hide it, you end up with the end of capitalism in a good way, in a Gene Roddenberry way. But since when has anybody in that kind of power let go of it willingly? And that's why I think there's a dark time before there's a light time.
Joe, I don't know if it's the end of capitalism, because if we had unlimited housing and food, we'd certainly pull the rest of humanity out of bone-crushing poverty. And I don't think that's the end of capitalism. I see it as the end of poverty.
It is the end of poverty. Yes.
They're not necessarily capital. Well, we are up against our Joe. This is so incredibly amazing.
I know we need another hour, right?
So, but we are against our last break. Want to remind our listeners they can get a hold of Ron or me by sending an email to asktsoe@thresholdnow.com. But now a word from our sponsors, including Woodard.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We're back with Joe Woodard. Joe, I can't believe this. We were supposed to be talking about tech and process, and we're solving the world's problems. I do want to ask you though about this because I know you're speaking on this at the BDO Alliance coming up about ideal client profiles. And let me go upstream just for a minute and say I believe ideal clients aren't ideal because of their industry or some other characteristic. I think they're ideal because of how they think. And I'm interested in your take on what makes an ideal client.
Yep. So first, how much time do I have on this segment?
9 minutes.
Okay, all right, very good. All right, so I can encapsulate it. I want to start out by answering your question in the negative. Why is it so important to have the ideal client? And if you look, and you can go out to woodard.com, click on the ideal practice model, pick if you're a CPA firm or a bookkeeping practice, and you can look at the 7 ideals. The 7 ideals are the same, but they're laid out differently for the different firm structures. If you look at all of the other 6 ideals, ideal client is one of them. If you look at ideal brand, ideal technology, process, engagements, team, all of them, technology, they all break if you have the wrong client, because the wrong client will resist the technology, run off the team, hurt your brand, not embrace your process, stretch the boundaries of your engagements, and push. So I like to say, if I'm selling my house, or buying a house, it's location, location, location. And if I'm running a professional service firm, it's client, client, client. I mean, those are the 3 things that matter, are the client, and the client. Then you can build an ideal practice once you have that. All right. So now to answer your question directly in the positive, I agree with you that niche is not the defining characteristic of, hey, we service nonprofits, all nonprofits are ideal clients. I do believe niche has a power. It has a branding power, it has a process power, it has a technology power, it has a team power. But that within that niche, if you go in that direction, and that's an if you go in the direction, then you have to find your ideal clients within the nonprofits and within the manufacturing or whatever your niche is. And then, because we don't say niche down here in the South, we say niche, right? But there are the 2 pronunciations. I like to say with some service lines, even transformative ones, there are riches in the niches, yes. But with some of that work, even transformative work, there are leashes in the niches, right? So you can hurt yourself by limiting certain kinds of work to certain kinds of industry. And I break that down in the presentation I'm going to be giving at BDO Alliance, where I will say, if you are protecting a client's journey, I'm all about transformation, by the way, absolutely. But back to I'm stuck on Maslow for a minute. I've got to protect the client's journey, stop the bleed, take care of the core needs of the business, and then I can start talking about elevating them upward, right? So if I'm protecting a client's journey, that's still a tremendous value add, right? I'm reducing spend with spend management, risk of fraud. I'm bringing them into regulatory compliance. I'm helping them to focus on their vision, their mission, their purpose. I'm helping them to sleep at night, giving them peace of mind. A lot of amazing value in client journey protection. But if I'm doing regulatory compliance on sales tax or payroll, and I'm doing it for industry A versus industry B, why limit it by industry? It's focused more on the nature of the work, not the recipient of the work defined by the niche's service. The niche is not industry. Okay, on the other side of the fence, if I'm doing business strategy, fractional CFO, financial planning and analysis, key performance indicators, working with the client on that, I need to understand their business model really well. And back to your first do no harm you talk about all the time, Ron, I can do a lot of harm if I try to help a restaurant and I don't understand overpouring at their bar and table turns. I have no business trying to help them with business strategy, not understanding those things. And the same could be said, I could give examples in every industry. So riches in the niches, because I have to laser focus that expertise. And then you can deal with all the branding implications of where you go with that later, and if the branding power tips you in one way or the other. So ideal client could vary depending on the service arm. in which service and where they skew to the service arms. But ideal client is more than just who's a good recipient of my service, controllership, FP&A, so forth. It's also the culture of the client, the respect that the client has for the work I do and for the people that I have doing that work. And back to the broader definition of work, I'm not just grudging through things like a utility. I am working in the sense we've been talking about this whole episode to the betterment of the client, worshiping, doing all things for the glory of God is the way a Christian would say it, right? Worshiping God even through my work. Can I really do that with a toxic client that doesn't respect me, doesn't respect the boundaries of the relationship? I mean, it's interdependence is two happy, healthy, whole, interdependent people, says Covey, being more than the sum of our parts. You can't do that when you're in a toxic relationship. You devolve into codependency, which is fueled by enablement. And anybody who's had an addictive personality in their life will tell you that's where it goes. So that was a lot, but
Oh, it was great.
that's how we define ideal client.
So let me tackle two topics that I think are very, very interrelated. You talk about engagement handling and boundaries, and then pricing tiers by not the scope of work, but the nature of the work, which I think is brilliant, by the way. I absolutely love that. I'm totally on board with that. The engagement handling and boundaries, though, let's take scope creep. Scope creep to me is a symptom. And the real disease is unclear value, unclear focus, and unclear due care.
And,
that we
and
shouldn't
wrong
be
price, too low price at the beginning, so you don't have the price capacity to service the client well.
That's right. And due care, meaning you don't have the competency to do what the client's asking of you.
Back to helping the restaurant when you don't understand table turns.
Exactly. Yes. And here's the interesting thing, Joe. Doctors don't suffer from this.
No, they don't. They're quick to go, I'm referring you to this person.
That's right. And the reason they don't is because a doctor is defined by what they don't do.
Bingo. That's kind of bookends for the episode too, because personal productivity and productivity is not largely what you don't do. But I love, and I use this example all the time, that I went to my dentist and they can put on a crown, they can clean the teeth, they can do the fillings. But when I needed to have a wisdom tooth extracted, some dentists will do that, but they referred me to someone in their network, someone with whom they were networked. They didn't say go out shopping for someone. They said call this person. This person knew exactly how the other person worked, and they each stayed in their swim lanes, right? And so I think that we could have a little bit more narrow swim lanes and be more expert at what we do. And that's why I define the swim lanes by nature. I don't even like to call them tiers. I've started calling them swim lanes.
And I like that too. So let me ask you this, just going back to the riches are in the niches. With the tiers by nature, do you advise, at least long-term, that they actually just offer one type of nature, like just CFO work, rather than having all three?
No, I think you've got to be holistic. And I know that's or have a tight network like my dentist did, because the problem is, unless you're controlling the inputs, the nature of the books, the quality of the bookkeeping, or the regulatory compliance, the CFO is going to end up constantly inheriting a mess and giving wrong information or not being able to help the patient. It's metaphorically speaking. So yes, they can do just CFO, but only if they're tightly networked with a network of other professionals they know and trust to steward the client through the other swim lanes. What I have found is those networks, though they exist in plenty in the medical world, don't in the accounting world. And we kind of have to have the multiple departments in one firm to control the quality. I wish it were not that way, but that's what I'm finding is largely the case.
Awesome. Joe, tell us about Scaling New Heights coming up in June.
Yeah, so this is going to be our 17th year, our 17th conference. And it's good, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, it's all about making it so, actually creating these realities in your life. We have David Allen coming, but also Shantae Lowe, who I've not mentioned, an Olympian who competed in the Olympics while suffering from breast cancer. Wow. So if you have excuses that you give yourself for why you don't become the best version of yourself, she will knock those excuses right off the table on Sunday night.
That's fantastic. Was she at Scaling before?
No.
No. Okay.
We've had Olympians before, but not her.
Not her. Okay. Okay. Maybe that's where I was confusing. That sounds awesome. This is great. Thanks again, Joe, for coming back for the 8th time. Really appreciate it. Love our discussions. Geez, they go way too fast. Ed, what's coming up next week?
Well, next week, Ron, we're going to right a wrong, and for the first time, have on the show Paul Dunn, because we are not done with Dunn.
Yeah, awesome. I'll see you in 167 hours.
This has been The Soul of Enterprise, Business in the Knowledge Economy, sponsored by Sage. No, sponsored by Woodard. What is my brain going? Building your ideal practice with coaching, education, community, and resources. Visit us next week on the web at www.thesoulofenterprise.com. Next week, Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. But as always, we love to see you out on the web at thesoulofenterprise.com.